Hello and welcome. I'm Tracy Wallach. In this talk, I'm going to provide a brief overview of the state of group relations conference research and report briefly on my own findings doing research at 6 different group relations conferences. The discussion is further informed by my own experiences as both a conference member and consulting staff in numerous conferences since 1985. For a more extensive discussion, please see the reference list at the end of this presentation. Empirical studies of group relations conferences and their outcomes are few in number. Over the past 5 decades, group relations organizations have sponsored hundreds of conferences in which thousands have participated. We assume that participants are learning or will learn from the experience, but we often have little evidence upon which to base that assumption, other than what we observe during the conference itself. There is little, if any, formal follow-up with participants post-conference, with the exception of students who attend conferences as a course requirement, and research and evaluation of participant learning at conferences is not part of standard practice. Early on, A. Kenneth Rice resisted doing research at conferences due to its potential interference with the here and now experience of the conference. At the same time, he suggested that such research might be more acceptable once the field became more established. Resistance among practitioners to doing basic outcomes or evaluation research at conferences continues, even after 50 years of practice. This is evidenced by the dearth of group relations conference research in the literature, with a few exceptions. Longitudinal studies are even more rare. Group relations outcomes research has occurred primarily in a few university settings at Temple University, Northwestern, University of Chicago, and New York University, and more recently at the University of California in San Diego. The research has attempted to measure various aspects of participant learning and factors that appear to help or hinder conference learning. Such variables examined include those related to individual member characteristics and those that are related to the characteristics of the conference. Group relations conference research methods have included systematic observation with or without audio or video recording and coding, ethnography, psychometric techniques, with the purpose of studying how individuals, both members and consulting staff, are impacted by the conference experience. Studies have been aimed at individual member characteristics such as pre-existing levels of subject-object development or member learning styles. Conference variables studied include conference context, that is, who sponsors the conference and the number of conferences sponsored, design, including the duration, number of events, and intensity, whether it's residential or non-residential, and linkages, that is, the social and authority ties between staff and members of a conference. Characteristics of conference consulting staff, such as their orientation or conceptualization of their roles, their gender and level of authority, and the impact of those characteristics on conference dynamics and learning, have also been important areas of study. Lipgar and colleagues used Q methodology to study the relationship between gender and authority in conferences over a period of 10 years. Residential conferences of greater intensity and complexity, that is, longer residential conferences with strong sponsors, that is, those that are able to successfully recruit and finance membership, and authority and social ties between member and staff, were found to increase the amount of learning reported by participants. I conducted research at 3 conferences in the 2000s, which were reported in a publication in 2014. I conducted a similar study of 3 consecutive conferences in the 2010s Authority, Power, and Justice Leadership for Change series at Boston College. For all the research, I adapted a qualitative evaluation model that was developed by Patton. Patton is one of the foremost academics in qualitative research and evaluation. The model uses surveys, interviews, and observation to obtain data. The research in each of the conferences consisted of participant observation from the position of staff consultant, though in one conference I was a member, the administration of post-conference evaluations immediately after and at intervals of 3 to 6 months and 1 year post-conference. The post-conference evaluation and follow-up surveys measured the degree to which participants' expectations and goals were met, what participants learned, participant views of conference staff effectiveness in assisting their learning, and personal and professional impact. I also interviewed a select number of participants. Conference learning could not always be easily defined immediately following the conference and evolved over time. The data from all the conferences suggest that for both experienced and inexperienced conference members, the process of learning and meaning-making is complex, relational, and evolves over time, even beyond the conference boundaries. Learning in conferences is cumulative, and returning participants build on their learning from previous conferences. There were ambivalent or even negative responses to staff and to various conference events. The conference as a whole, though, was greater than the sum of its parts. As one participant put it, "I don't think I truly understood why the role of consultants were set up the way they were. The responding or not, chiming in or not, being the focus or not. Maybe I'm still processing that, but it adds an element of mystery that I think takes away and instead of enhancing the experience, or at least framing it in a way that provides more context about that, even if it's at the end." Post-conference activities such as the post-conference debrief, classwork, or the surveys and interviews served as forums for participants to further reflect on their conference experiences and enhanced learning. This is consistent with previous research when participants and staff had ongoing relationships outside the conference, learning increased. Viewing conferences as one-off, self-contained events may foreclose on possible learning opportunities. Many participants reported gaining personal awareness, learning about role and authority, and the group unconscious. My earlier research suggested that personal learning was greater than systemic learning. In my later research, I saw some evidence of both personal and systemic learning. Learning is idiosyncratic and variable. This speaks on one level to the diversity of participants attending the conferences and can be seen as a positive, that the conference provides learning opportunities to a wide variety of people. But if our aim is to help participants understand systems and/or to understand more about a particular conference theme, then there is still some room for improvement of learning on the systems level. Learning was sometimes transformational. Most participants found it worthwhile. As one participant put it, "I found the conference disturbing in mostly good ways. It shook up some of my own preconceptions about people and how they interact and helped me understand the roles I take up within a group. It was not always fun, but it was always interesting and I think worthwhile." However, the conference also caused some trauma for participants. For inexperienced participants, attending a group relations conference can be a shock. One member described the conference as Freud meets Lord of the Flies. The traditional consulting stance left some participants feeling confused and unclear about what they learned. While a certain amount of uncertainty and anxiety can facilitate learning, too much can shut participants down completely or come at too steep a cost. Here are what some participants said about conference trauma. I remember the intense, disturbing anxiety I felt throughout the weekend. I remember feeling like a lab rat. I remember being absolutely miserable, and I remember feeling ripped off and misled by the quote-unquote workshop's intentions. Another reported, I feel like I learned things about myself that I didn't know, and I would have appreciated if that didn't have to happen through pain. It felt painful to be there, hurtful and tense, more than enlivening. I can be in tense situations that make me feel alive and invigorated, not like I wanted to shun the experience. So it's taken me longer to recover from the weekend and call out the learning than I would have liked. Learning happened though, and I'm sure more is on the way. A third said, I was emotionally, physically, and psychologically overwhelmed by day 2 to the point of crying at times. I am not sure what I learned there. I did not like the idea of instilling conflict, chaos in otherwise a normal functioning group. This raises some questions about the need to further consider the consulting stance that we take in conferences. Many involved in group relations believe that this kind of experience isn't for everyone, and the following comments, along with my previous research, offer some support for that. I found myself confused oftentimes in the large group settings because comments made by consultants were very vague and abstract at times. Although I'm sure this was done on purpose, it frustrated me some and made me feel like I didn't know what was going on or what I was supposed to be learning from the situation. Another participant stated, I was startled to see that love was only mentioned 2 times in the entire conference. In my day-to-day interaction, we always talk about love, sometimes overuse it. It got too comfortable. The conference, taught me to be more human because it exposed me to a human landscape I'd never seen, but I wouldn't want to be there long term. The second comment in particular raises questions about whether the consulting stance we take somehow privileges pain and aggression over other aspects of our and the participants' humanity. Learning in relation to the conference themes was mixed. According to Kolb's experiential learning model, learning occurs through a 4-phase cycle that includes experiencing, reflecting, conceptualizing, and applying. The model suggests that learning is incomplete or less effective without all 4 phases. The typical group relations conference offers both experiential events, the small study group, large study group, and IE, and reflective events, RAGs, and plenary discussions, with emphasis on the experiential events, particularly in shorter weekend conferences. Participants are free to actively experiment with their roles in the temporary institution of the conference, but application to their home institutions happens by necessity after the conference. There is typically no room in a group relations conference for conceptualization. In the early years of conference work, lectures were part of the format, but were gradually replaced by more experiential events. Some conference directors have begun to reinstate a lecture or orientation either prior to or during the conferences. In the U.S., most group relations conferences are offered in weekend non-residential format, Friday to Sunday. The abbreviated weekend conference format poses particular challenges in terms of its ability to provide adequate time for the reflection and conceptualization elements of learning for both members and staff. Given the cumulative and evolutionary nature of conference learning, it does not make sense to draw rigid boundaries around the conference event and neglect involvement with participants before and after the conference. Post-conference activities such as the post-conference debrief, classwork, research interviews, and even the surveys served as forums for participants to further reflect on their conference experiences and enhanced learning. I would recommend that sponsors and conveners of group relations conferences conduct evaluations of every conference immediately following and at intervals post-conference. Regular evaluation provides sponsors and directors with direct feedback from participants about the processes at work during and after conferences, conference structures, and tasks that contribute to participant learning and how participants make meaning of their experiences. This can help directors and sponsors improve upon conference design and implementation. The surveys, and especially the interviews, provide added value to participants by offering further opportunities to reflect upon their conference experience after the event. I would also suggest that the conference structure could be adapted to better incorporate and facilitate learning about conference themes. In addition, the consulting stance might be adapted to better mirror today's organizational and societal context, where there may be different authority structures. My particular interest is in using group relations conferences as an action research tool and intervention with more than one primary task. This would include the traditional task of learning about leadership and authority. The model also has great potential to understand or intervene in particular group, organizational, or social problems, or developing networks and collaboration between organizations concerned with social change and justice. For more information on group relations conference research, please see the following references. If your organization is interested in exploring how this method of working might help you better engage and collaborate in your community, please contact me at info@tracywallach.com.